So this happened around a year ago, but it feels fresh in my mind because of how strange it was. But it probably won't be as crazy as most of the other stories here. First, some context. I was about to turn 20 and I was in my junior year of college. The college I attended was fairly small, but in a very large city. It's a private school, and instead of dorms, they rented out various apartments for the students in residential apartment buildings in an upscale part of the city. I lived in one of them. This was considered on campus, in a one-bedroom apartment on the 17th floor with 2 other roommates. Most of the tenants in my building were older businessmen and models. However, there are several colleges in the area that brought in wealthy international students as well, so you'd see a few in the building every now and again. I believe it was a Friday night around 10 p.m. and my boyfriend, I'll call him Sam, and I were watching Netflix and having a glass of whiskey. My roommate and her boyfriend were asleep in the bedroom, but they come in a little later in the story. A few things to note. One of my roommates, I'll call her Amanda, had started living with her boyfriend at the time, who lived a few floors down from us. She was often in and out because she still kept most of her stuff, like clothes and makeup, in our apartment, due to the fact that our school had strict rules, and we had room checks once a month, so it had to look like she still lived there. Another thing was, we never locked our door if someone was awake in the apartment. Probably not the smartest thing, but hey, we were on the 17th floor in an upscale part of the city. We never had a problem before, and we felt safe. The last thing to note here is that the layout of our apartment is important to the story. When you walk in the front door, you're in a large foyer with a closet to the left and a bathroom to the right. There's a hallway straight ahead that branches off to another hallway, which leads to the left into the bedroom. If you pass that hallway and keep going straight, there's an open doorway into the kitchen immediately to the right. If you pass that, you enter the living room, which you can't see into or out of unless you are standing next to the doorway to the kitchen. Now, back to the story. Before Sam and I had finished our drinks, we heard the door open and closed. I assumed it was Amanda coming in to get clothes or something, but I didn't hear anything after the door shut. I thought maybe she had gone to the bathroom, but it was strange since she usually wears heels, and you can hear her walking around the apartment. After about a minute of silence, Sam and I hear someone speaking in a foreign language. We both turn around and look at each other with the same "that is not Amanda" expression on our faces. Slightly spooked and unsure of what is about to happen, Sam and I spring to our feet, and he grabs the pocket knife I had sitting out on my desk. We both stand against the wall, me behind Sam, knife held out slightly in front of him. You could not see us unless you were in the living room. We wait. It becomes clear there is more than one person in our apartment who should not be there. That's when we hear footsteps approaching the living room, and my heart is beating out of my chest. Then, a short Asian man, who looks to be maybe 19 or 20, walks into the room and locks eyes with us. He's wearing nothing but boxers. After a moment of silence and confusion, Sam blurts out, "Who are you?" The intruder looks at Sam, then at the knife, widens his eyes, and utters, and sprints out of the apartment. I assume his intruder friend followed because the door slammed shut and we didn't hear anything else. We ran to the foyer and locked and deadbolted the door. By the time Sam had done this, I'd already dialed 911 and had the operator on the phone. I give the woman our location and tell her what just occurred, and she dispatches a unit to our building. Sometime during this phone call, we hear loud banging on our front door with the sound of the door handle jiggling. They're back. I tell the operator what's going on as I'm giving details about the original encounter, and she's just trying to calm me down while these guys are banging loudly on our door trying to get back in. After I give all the details, I hang up and immediately text Amanda to not come upstairs under any circumstances. We then go to wake up my other roommate and her boyfriend in the bedroom, who are still sound asleep. As I'm doing this, the banging begins happening intermittently, every 30 seconds or so, for another few minutes. My roommate and her boyfriend came out and sat on the couch looking terrified, and watching and listening to all this go down. It's worth noting that these two are not the brightest of the bunch, but those are stories for another sub. We then hear a few less threatening knocks at the front door, so Sam and I venture out and check the peephole to make sure it's the police and not the two intruders. Sure enough, 3 officers in uniform are standing outside, so we open the door and we begin explaining the situation, giving a description of the guy we saw. We didn't see the other one, but they shouldn't be hard to recognize considering at least one of them was basically naked. As I'm talking to the officers, one of them turns to look to their left. Sure enough, the intruders are walking towards our door again. The officers excuse themselves, close the front door, and go to confront the two men. We couldn't hear much of what was going on behind the door, so we stood in the front room waiting for the officers to come back and give us the tea. After a few minutes, the officer knocks on the door again and tells us what they learned. Apparently, the two men did not speak much English, but from what they gathered, they were drunk. Like, really drunk. The men told them they were looking for the laundry room. It made sense to me at first, but looking back, I don't think that's what was going on. They had no laundry with them, and it was clear once you entered the front door that it was an apartment and not a laundry room at all. You certainly wouldn't continue walking past the kitchen and into an apartment living room if you were looking to do laundry. But who knows, maybe they were just that drunk. Here's my favorite part of the story. The officers found out the two men lived in our building, on our floor, just 2 doors down the hall. As I said before, it wasn't uncommon to see international college-age students in the building, and it could have simply been a harmless, drunken encounter. Something about the whole thing never sat right with me though, and I really felt like I was in danger. I don't recall ever seeing the intruder again after that, and I moved out a few months after. But to the drunken naked man who entered my apartment that night looking to do laundry, let's not meet again.
My father worked in a machine shop across town which had its fair share of characters there. One of these people was named James. Now, James was one of those guys that would seem normal at first but had one heck of a temper. One minute you could be eating lunch, and then the next he would be trying to fight you over the smallest things. So while my father was at work, James had come in absolutely drunk, which many of the guys had done before, but James could barely function, let alone operate a mill. My father pulled him aside and told him he needed to leave, and that him coming in drunk could possibly get him or someone else hurt, which then leads to him getting mad and trying to fight my father. Now, James isn't a small guy. He's about 6 foot tall and around the larger side, while my father was only about 5'6". James had grabbed a metal pole and was swinging it around trying to hit my father with it. Thankfully he didn't hit him, but he tore the heck out of a door before being restrained by the other workers and was then kicked out, being fired. My father ended up leaving work early, and he made his way to a friend's place to have a beer and calm his nerves. Later on in the day, 8-year-old me is home alone as my mother was at the store getting groceries. I was playing Halo 3 at the time, before hearing a knock at the door. I walked up to the door, and I see James through the window. Although I didn't know him well as I've only met him once, I knew him well enough to know that he wasn't a stranger, so I opened the door.
"Hey, how are you? Is your father home?"
He had said in the nicest tone that he could muster, his breath smelling of alcohol. I had told him no, but somehow my 8-year-old self knew well enough to not say that I was home alone. My mom was in the shower. That was an absolute lie, and her truck wasn't even in the driveway, and it was pretty obvious I was home alone. He had then nodded, walking away from the door a little before I closed it, promptly locking it before going back to my game. A few minutes pass by and my mother arrives home with a few groceries. Once they were brought inside, we had heard a bang at the door, then another, then another. This was not like a knock. Someone was literally banging on our door trying to get in. My mom had looked through the window before grabbing me and the phone and running into the bedroom closet which had a lock. I had no clue what was going on, but I just knew it wasn't good. She had called 911 and had said there was a crazy man trying to break in. All the while the sound of the banging could be heard in the background. For what seemed like hours, we waited in the closet still hearing the loud bangs as he had started charging into the door with his shoulder, just screaming like a maniac. After about 15 minutes, we then heard the familiar sound of a police siren as we heard the confrontation right outside. It didn't take long for them to arrest the man. My mom stayed on the line with the 911 operator until we finally walked out, now seeing James in cuffs in the very back of a patrol car. My father had rushed home and hugged us both, James staring at us with pure hatred in his eyes. Although it wasn't confirmed, I had a good feeling that he was after my dad, wanting to finish the job and beating him. He had seen my mother's truck thinking it was my father, as he would occasionally drive it to work every now and then. To the awful man who tried to break into our home, and to the man who tried to hurt my father, I really hope I never see you ever again.
I dated 2 guys at university. One, Nick, lasted a few months. The other, well, it was literally just one date. Before I begin, I must say that I was a little naive, shy, and riddled with anxiety. I mean, I knew enough about the world and wasn't sheltered or anything, but when it comes to male intention toward me, I had low self-esteem and couldn't understand why anyone would be interested in me in that way, so I assumed all guys were just being friendly. Anyway, this second guy, Dave, I met during my first year at university. He was nice enough. We met in a language class I decided to take as an extra, and he smiled and chatted to me for a while. Honestly, now that I think back, I do remember meeting him that day, but I soon forgot about him over the course of the year. One day, toward the end of the first year, he came up to me, calling me by name, which I was surprised at, to be honest. We hadn't spoken since the first class, and I didn't even remember his name. He asked me if we had any homework from another class, a class that I didn't even know he was in. I remember feeling a bit confused about both. How he knew my name, and how he had seen me in a completely different class I hadn't even noticed him in, but I got over it and politely smiled and said we didn't. We talked a bit about how we were going to spend our summers, and that was that. At the very end of that year, our class had a night out drinking, and he was there. My housemate, myself, he and his friend all went to a club, and he proceeded to keep buying me drinks. I didn't really notice much, as he was also buying his friend drinks, but at one point, I declined more drinks, saying I didn't want any more, and he still bought me a drink, which I drank, so as not to appear rude. He dropped my housemate and I off at home. Probably not the best decision to get into a car with a guy who had been drinking, but I was young and stupid, and we all said goodbye. Now, at some point over that summer, I was abroad, and remember I randomly got a Facebook friend request from him. There was nothing abnormal at this point about his Facebook, and he seemed like a typical student doing student things. I accepted, and gradually he began to add all my online accounts. During my second year, I dated Nick, and I didn't see Dave at all until the end of that year. By this time, I had broken up with the other guy, and Dave asked me to go see a movie with him, and I accepted since he was a nice guy. He picked me up, we saw the movie, and he dropped me off again. Nothing weird, I thanked him and he left. We really only talked during the drive there and back, and I began to talk about where I grew up. Now, when I think back, he never divulged any information about himself, other than that he had been married once. I had honestly not realized he was much older than me, as he had quite a young face, but he never divulged his real age. It wasn't until much later that I found this information out. The next night, he invited me to his place, however I declined, telling him that I honestly didn't think there could be anything more than friendship between us. He seemed fine about this, and we went back to being friends. This is where things started to get weird. At the end of the final year, I was due to turn 21. We were having a big party back in my hometown, and I invited him along with more of my friends from university. He contacted me and apologized since he wouldn't be able to make it, and offered to take me out to dinner that evening as an early birthday present. I accepted. We went out, ate, and he offered to walk me home. All the way home, he kept commenting that I lived way out of town. It was a 30-minute walk to university, and 20 minutes into the city, which isn't long at all. I told him this, but he just kept commenting about how far from campus I lived. The house my 3 housemates and I lived in was in a suburban area, and not exactly rural or anything, so I was confused by this. He really made it seem like I lived miles away. Eventually, we got there, and me, being my typical naive self, invited him in, as I felt bad that he had walked out of his way to walk me home. 2 of my housemates were in bed, but one was still up watching TV. The three of us chatted for a while before it started to get later and later, and my friend and I started dropping hints for him to leave, and he just wasn't. We said we were tired and he just kept talking, somehow always moving the conversation towards sex. It must have been about 3 or 4 a.m. before my housemate, a lot bolder than me, finally stood and told him we were going to bed and that he had to leave. For years, we thought he just didn't get hints and was a bit dense, until a few months ago. Fast forward, and I haven't spoken to him in years. He blocked me on Facebook because we got into a heated debate about politics around 3 years ago. A few months ago, a friend sent me a news article and commented, "Didn't this guy go to university with us?" Sure enough, there's a picture of Dave. The article? It's about how he was on trial, accused of raping a few women around the time I knew him at university. It also stated he was almost twice the age of the students at that university at the time, a mature student, and a judge had branded him a dangerous man. Looking back, that night, him being reluctant to leave suddenly made a lot more sense. I will forever be thankful to my housemate for not leaving me alone with him in our living room. I'm selfishly happy I never had the experience those girls did. However, my heart goes out to them. I don't know the outcome of the trial, but little things, the hanging around, the constant attempts to turn conversation sexual, the secrecy about himself, buying me drinks after I declined, it all points to the same thing in my mind. I then noticed he still followed me on Twitter, and morbid curiosity enticed me to take a look. It hadn't been used for a long time. However, there was a link to another account he had, one that sickened me. It contained incoherent ramblings about how women were terrible, getting more and more aggressive with each tweet. It quite frankly made me feel sick. I don't know where he is now, but Dave, let's never, ever meet again.